Our session will start in just a few moments. First, some brief announcements. First, please note that we'll not open attendees' audio or video lines during the session. We do, however, very much welcome your questions and comments, and we just encourage you to submit those at any time. You may do that by using the chat window that will appear below the video display on the webpage where you're viewing the session. Also, please note that we'll be recording today's session. We'll make a recording available to our members in the Sales Management Association's resource library. Our members will also be able to download slides there. Our session today is one in a series of web-based Sales Management Association presentations that feature practitioners and thought leaders in the field of Salesforce effectiveness. The Sales Management Association is a professional association for sales operations and sales leadership professions. We provide our members with research, case studies, training, peer networking, and professional development. If you're joining us for the first time, we invite you to consider membership in the association and also to visit us online. You'll find us at salesmanagement.org. I'm Bob Kelly, Sales Management Association Chairman. Today, I'm very pleased to introduce two excellent speakers and welcome them to what should be a great discussion today. So let me do that now. Today's guests are Nicole Collida Davis from NielsenIQ and Michelle Vazzana from VantagePoint Performance. Nicole Collida Davis is head of global sales operations at NielsenIQ, a global provider of retail and consumer measurement and data. Her work focuses on programs that support sales organization efficiency and productivity. She's worked in a variety of sales and customer success roles at NielsenIQ, most recently as the firm's Senior Vice President of North America Consumer Intelligence Sales. Much of her career has been focused on go-to-market transformation in large global sales organizations. She's kind enough to join us today, where she'll share her recent experience in just such a project. Nicole, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thanks so much, Bob. Glad to be here.
And I'm going to also introduce your co-presenter, Michelle Vazzana. She's co-founder and chief strategy officer at VantagePoint Performance, a global sales training and development firm. She is co-author of the highly regarded book, Cracking the Sales Management Code, and the more recent book, Crushing Quota, which addresses sales coaching. She's a frequent speaker on sales leadership topics everywhere, but also here. We see a lot of her at the Sales Management Association. She's one of our most highly rated speakers for our webinars and our live events. Michelle, always great to have you with us. Thank you for being with us today.
Absolutely, glad to be here.
Okay, good. So shortly I'll turn it over to you two, and you've been kind enough to invite me to comment along the way, so I might pop in and do that. And also, though, before I do that, I want to just point something out to our audience that we have 3 polls. They'll be referenced in the presentation, and we'll encourage you to take the polls at certain times during the session, but you're also welcome to take them at any time. You'll see them if you might need to refresh the page. You'll see them just below the video screen. So thank you for participating in those, and when it's time, we'll share results for those. Okay. Nicole, we'll start with you. Thank you again for being here. And you're going to talk to us about a transformational initiative at NielsenIQ. And,
yeah.
So we're looking forward to hearing about that. Maybe you could start off and just give us a sense for the environment that you work in there at NielsenIQ.
Yeah. Wow, that's a great question. The environment that we're working in today is incredibly thought-provoking. I think that's probably a good way to kick off and set the stage for what so many of the associates at NielsenIQ are focusing on today. And I mean that in kind of the most positive light possible. We are really taking an opportunity to be a bit pensive about where we've come in our journey as a company so far. We're almost 100 years old, and so there's a lot of history to our organization, and we're spending that time thinking about how we go for another 100 years. What does it look like? What are the thoughts and the ideas that are going to generate the growth we need to really continue our legacy? So thought-provoking, a bit pensive in the organization right now, all under the effort of taking us forward in a new direction.
Pensive, it's an interesting descriptor. It probably isn't unique to NielsenIQ these days. So I know you have some slides to share. May I put those up for you?
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay, here we go.
And I'll kind of jump in. Yeah, I doubt it is unique to NielsenIQ, but it is an interesting time in our industry, and I think so much of our industry has changed in so many ways, not just as it relates to COVID, but as it relates to so many other factors, how people buy, how people sell, and it's really been a launching pad for us for this sales transformation. So thanks again for having me. I'm thrilled to be here with the SMA, with Michelle, and with so many peers and industry leaders to have an opportunity to talk a little bit about the transformation that we've undertaken at NielsenIQ. First things first, I launched this chat by saying we all recognize that change is hard. I come to our session today in the midst of a lot of change as an organization. We've just spun off from our parent company, Nielsen. We're under new ownership by Advent International. We have a new CEO and a new executive team. We're truly investing in a much brighter future, and it feels like we're moving at Mach speed to get there. So there's so much going on, and I want to be clear with the audience that I don't pretend to have all of the answers on how to define a sales transformation, but I'm excited to share with each of you kind of where we're at in our own personal transformation. The other thing I mentioned is we have to recognize the fact that change is iterative. It's really a living and breathing process for us. So what I hope you hear from me today is that this is a point in time reflection on how we've gotten to this point, why we're here, why it matters to us, and the steps that we're taking to change the organization over the course of the coming months. I also hope you'll hear from me just a very real message, recognizing that where we're at today is definitely not an endpoint in and of itself. It's kind of a rest stop on our transformation journey. So with that in mind, let me share a little bit about that journey with each of you. So Oxford Languages really defines sales as the exchange of a commodity for money. It's a pretty basic concept at its root. But at that core, I would argue that the cornerstone of successful selling is really just opening and closing deals. It's a required element, right, for anyone to find growth. But that growth can really be elusive when your sellers are burdened with a lot of non-client facing activities. In fact, at NielsenIQ, historically, our sellers were tasked with everything on the sales spectrum, whether it was prospecting for themselves, warming leads, generating content. Once the deal was closed, their work certainly wasn't over. They were often generating contracts in partnership with our contracts team, really having to focus on billing. And then they often even owned delivery through to value creation. If you can believe it, they often even owned operational quality and servicing. So our sellers were really responsible for everything in this journey that our customers were taking with us. Their plates were full, and opening and closing deals really felt like something that fell to the back burner. On top of that, this problem in finding growth is exacerbated in this model when, in addition to being overloaded, your sellers can't focus on those things that enable growth further. There are so many, especially you talk about changing times and a lot of the way that the industry has adjusted over the past year and a half plus. There are so many elements that can help generate growth, from sales technology to CRM adoption, account planning, and white space analysis. In a world where your sellers are overburdened, all of that really falls by the wayside, and there's not a lot of focus on those growth enablers. And this is exactly where we found ourselves at NielsenIQ. Our sellers were really at the center of this storm, and they didn't have a path to get out of it. Our organization was lacking both efficiency and effectiveness in our sales process. Our sellers were traditionally consultants. They were historically incented on things like total customer satisfaction, on value delivery, operational excellence. Revenue sat with that, but it kind of was in partnership with all of those other elements when we thought about a total incentivization structure for our teams. Our coverage model was also a challenge. It meant that our sellers were tasked with so much that they were spending way too much time outside of a sales cycle and involved in non-sales activities. This consultative model was really successful for for us for many years. It was effective on its own, but the industry shifted, our clients shifted a bit, and we found ourselves in a position where our growth was a bit limited by the approach that we were taking in our go-to-market. Sales transformation for us became kind of those windshield wipers, if you will, on the path in this storm. They helped us see a little bit of a brighter future and navigate out of some of the murkiness and cloudiness and start to get on a path that would lead us to become a high-performing, sales-focused culture. So I'm curious, we'll flip over to our first poll. If there are any of you in the audience that have really had an opportunity to challenge something in your organization, in your culture, in your business model, what was the biggest single roadblock that you hit as you took that on? Was it budget, executive endorsement, adoption from your seller audience, or even response from your clients? So let me give everybody a second to share their insights on that poll.
You can, if you don't see the poll below the video display window, you can refresh your browser tab and it will begin to display. You can vote there. And Nicole, when you're ready, you can let me know when you'd like to display results, and we can display those in real time.
Yeah, let's display the results, Bob.
Oops, is that the right poll?
That is the next poll. So if you go back one,
Sorry about that.
We're looking at when challenging culture, what was the single biggest roadblock? And as you're flashing that up, Bob, I'll talk a little bit about our experience.
Thank you for stalling. I'll figure this out momentarily.
While all of these are certainly challenges that we face, the biggest one for us at NielsenIQ was really around executive endorsement. I mean, of course, our executives wanted to find growth. That certainly wasn't the challenge. But convincing an organization that the pain of change and the disruption that change brings to an organization were worth undertaking was the biggest task that we had at hand. So we always had the upfront support to assess that change, just to be clear. But when it came to executing the change, we generally stopped short of taking that next step. So the executive endorsement for us at NielsenIQ became our biggest opportunity.
Great. We have a small sample set, just 4 people, but you can see that people, for half the respondents, it's a people issue.
Okay, cool. We'll come back to this one too as we move into the second poll. Bob, if you check back in on the first poll and have anything to share, we can always jump back in.
Oh, so sorry. That was, in fact, the second poll again. Sorry.
No problem at all.
You can see how people issues are quite difficult. Among the people, most difficult are the webcast moderators who can't figure out their poll.
The audience can be sure to take another poll on their assessment afterwards and share that feedback. So I talked a bit about executive endorsement. It was key for us. We, with Jim, our CEO, Jim Peck, who really saw our growth potential and was really pushing us to better understand the opportunity to grab it. We had a different level of executive engagement than we'd ever experienced in our past. So we started on this journey with a different intent from day one. And the first step for us in this whole process was defining our objectives. And honestly, this was the easiest stage in our transformation. As I mentioned before, every executive team wants to find growth. So for NielsenIQ, defining our objectives was more about focusing on how we'd find that growth rather than setting the stage for growth itself. So knowing that we needed to transform, we quickly landed on this idea of generating efficiency and effectiveness for our sellers. It kind of became the foundation of everything that we would do to generate that growth. We got to work on researching those objectives, and with that executive endorsement up front, we actually had the funds to be able to go get some external benchmarks and really dig into this challenge. So as we moved into the research phase, we set out to understand what good looks like. And frankly, we leveraged our networks a ton. We wanted to understand how we compared to a lot of industry standards. So we talked with other best-in-class organizations about how they structured their sales teams and really took that in and tried to digest it. We engaged best-in-class partners too. We have worked very, very closely with Bain throughout our sales transformation to set the stage on all of the motions our teams were taking and the time associated with each of them. And our research with Bain showed us that roughly half of our time was being spent in non-client facing sales activities. So this research became the perfect launching point for our engagement strategy. I don't think anyone would argue that in times of disruption and change, engagement is absolutely essential. That held true for us. Our organization has been through an immense amount of change in leadership and ownership over the past more than 2 years. So engaging our associates early and often and at all levels was critical for us. We started communicating with our organization well in advance of any formal transformation launch. We started talking about things like, what does a modern sales organization look like? And how have those companies that have embraced a modern approach generated growth? We identified a lot of the pain points for our sellers, and we talked about how this evolution would help us actually address those pain points over time. We did all of this before we ever even told anyone in the organization how we'd actually evolve. So we were really laying that foundation. And we stayed close with our executives too. We never missed a chance to reinforce just how painful our current state was for the organization and just how big the opportunity in front of us was to find those efficiencies and enable that effectiveness. So this leads us really to the heart of our transformation, and that is a new model that enables both that efficiency and effectiveness, both of those plays. We made the conscious decision to specialize. So you might be sitting there right now asking yourself how or why we really did that. How much should your organization specialize? In fact, a lot of you may be arguing that developing a diverse set of talents across your team is actually a key to driving differentiated results. And I don't disagree with that. I think that there's 100% a place for that. But let me remind you of where we were coming from. We were historically an organization that applied this jack of all trades model. We were successful for many years by leveraging the consultative approach and letting the incremental revenue follow as a part of that. But as the industry changed, we had to adjust our approach. We are on a mission to create role clarity and to remove any ambiguity for our teams. We had to create that laser focus on opening and closing deals for our sellers. So we took time to define our from to, and we started by leveraging all of that research that I've referenced. We needed to understand how time was being spent, and that was incredibly powerful. So we started the exercise of bucketing those tasks and really defining our process. And we went from this model where our seller was the jack of all trades and focused on every element of the sales cycle, even including, operational excellence, to a model where the sellers were laser focused on opening and closing deals that were generated based on warm leads, and then re-entering the next sales cycle as quickly as possible. And I'll tell you, even aspirationally, we really target getting our sellers now to spending less than 10% of their time on administrative activities. For the record, we're nowhere close to that yet, but that is our North Star that we continue to work towards as we roll out this model. So how do we do it? We took a couple different approaches. And the first was to really hub the work that supports the top of the funnel sales development and helps move our deals more effectively through prospecting, discovering, and proposing onto contracting, billing, and delivery. We see those as unique tasks that don't require the seller's input at every stage along the way. So we had an opportunity to centralize some talent within the organization and really incubate that talent around those tasks to create this idea of sales readiness so that our funnel was running effectively from start to finish. We also took this opportunity to develop those functional support pillars. I mentioned that so many of these are enablers for growth. Functional support for us really means activation of technology, operating rhythms that support strong pipeline and strong forecasting, data governance, total addressable market analytics, and many, many more functions. Centralizing and again, incubating these functional support pillars is a key piece to our model that will enable our sellers to be effective in different ways than they've been able to be before. Our final focus and hub of work was around sales effectiveness. This encompasses really best-in-class models that high-performing organizations should have that were gaps for NielsenIQ. Think about sales-specific training tracks, CRM adoption, go-to-market strategy. These are all places where we are putting investment to be able to enable our sellers in a new and different way. So it's not rocket science. I will tell you that this is a very reasonable approach to structuring an organization. But for us, defining that process, understanding the role that technology would play in that process, in addition to the role that people would play, has really allowed us to think differently about our go-to-market. And there's some inherent benefit to this. So at the end of the day, we're certainly enabling more outcomes, and we're able to do that with really the same number of people in general. We are investing in talent and we are investing in growth, but we're putting that headcount into frontline sales so that we can really bring more opportunities to life for the organization. I would say this also delivers some other key results for us. It unlocks the growth, but you can't underestimate in times of change the power of role clarity in driving employee engagement. And that is also a key piece of our transformation strategy as we think about ensuring that we're investing in the talent that we have within the organization and developing that talent on a sales track at NielsenIQ. Okay, so with that, I want to move into our second poll. Bob gave us a sneak preview. So for those of you that have created transformations of any size with your sellers, what was the biggest opportunity for you in that change? And I think, I will give you a sneak peek in saying that all 4 of these pillars are important at NielsenIQ, but there was one that really kind of stood out to us as a differentiating factor. Bob, are we still tracking with people in the lead from the audience? Bob, I think you're on mute.
So sorry, you'd think I'd be a little faster by now after how many of these I've done. So sorry about that. But yeah, I was just going to remind our audience that if you've not voted, you can vote. Look for the second poll block below the video window. If you don't see that, just refresh your screen. And while people vote, and before we put up the results, I'll just ask a question of you, Nicole, about your approach and the changes that you made in the organization. You really had at the center of the effort this concept of the primary seller pre-transformation, which was this kind of jack of all trades who's doing more than just selling, really doing everything. And then you subsequently created a support function around that person and a lot of other roles that you use to separate pieces of the process before and after sales are made. So I'm just curious about the other jobs that you created. Did you create a lot of other jobs, and then did you slot people into those different roles, or was it chiefly a matter of sort of hiring to reinforce those jobs that you were adding?
Yeah, I think a bit of both. So I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the fact that, I'm laser focused here on the sales piece of the transformation, but a huge enabler of being able to create these hubs and create this role clarity within sales was actually work that we did in other functions as well. So we spun up a new strategy around customer success and a new coverage model that would support our sellers and support our clients in driving that value. So that work can't stop. We still need to be focused on value creation and operational excellence and all of those things. But we've got strong leaders in place that are working to really define that as a customer success specific role. So some of that was just moving folks into roles that reflected their talents and their desires. But some of it was also then hiring and thinking differently about the skill set that it would require. And I'll talk a little bit more about that research and that skill set and how we assess that as I move into the next section too.
Great. Well, as you can see from our poll, and by the way, I'll invite Michelle to comment too, just in case she's been waiting in the green room, exiled to the green room, and she's back. So I can't say I'm surprised. People are the hardest, I think.
Yeah, what's interesting about this is, as Nicole and I have been continuing this dialogue through this engagement, the question keeps coming up, do we have the right people in the right spot? And how do we know? Mm-hmm. And part of my role as a partner with Nicole is to be able to bring other resources to play. So we're beginning to examine the best way to figure out sort of a talent audit and whether or not, we have the people person fit, or the person role fit over time. So it's a very multifaceted challenge. And I'm not shocked that most of the folks that responded said people were our biggest challenge. That tends to be the case.
Michelle, a question for you. Let's look at these poll results. It's a small sample size, just 10, but it suggests that people represent the biggest single opportunity, followed then by process optimization, and then educating people, and then technology. Seems to me that really makes a lot of sense. That's a very sensible set of responses. It also occurs to me that many companies do this exactly in the opposite direction.
That's right. So I actually love these responses, because most organizations, if they want a sales transformation, skip some of the other steps that Nicole and her team have been so rigorous about. So the beauty for being a partner with Nicole in this process is there was so much work done ahead of time that when we began to engage, even in their evaluation process, they had a really clear idea of their current state, and then they had a sense for where they wanted to go. They weren't sure exactly how to get there, right? I mean, that's part of where they brought in outside expertise. But the level of rigor that they applied in analyzing their current state and being able to put a vision together and then make that more operational, it's really the ideal situation for a partner to come in and say, wow, you've really laid the groundwork. Here's how we can help you action some of those goals that you have. So it's really been a delightful process for us.
Great. And thanks to all who voted. I'll be back with poll 3.
Awesome.
Later.
Yeah, so this is great conversation, because it also tees up the fact that my answer might not be the answer that you would expect. For us at NielsenIQ, our biggest challenge actually was education. We had defined process, as I've talked about here, and we had supporting technology, although we still have a lot to understand about exactly what we want our end-to-end technology stack to look like. Our people were craving this change. For us, it really became about education. We didn't know what we didn't know. And oops, sorry about that, Michelle. We didn't know what we didn't know. And I like to think we were smart enough to recognize it. We knew there were some critical questions that we had to answer, and we didn't have the answers. We had to understand how to move from a consultative approach to a more agile, true selling approach. We had to diagnose how we should be selling. What does good even look like? And what buying situations are our sellers in? And how are the motions they take going to effectively support successful pitches? And then finally, with the sellers laser focused on deals, did we actually have the skills necessary to be able to be successful in opening and closing deals? These were all things that we truly couldn't answer. And so we needed to partner to better understand our opportunities in this space. And we leveraged VantagePoint as a part of this partnership. Michelle and our partners at VantagePoint have really helped us challenge our status quo. And we're investing in 2 key areas. Really, it is our own education on our strategic needs, but also, I would argue, in many ways more important, it's about our sellers' professional development. It's an investment in our teams and in our talent that will drive engagement and will drive differentiated outcomes. So we've built on this investment, we built on this foundation with a 3-year investment in partnership with VantagePoint to launch our transformation and ensure that we successfully continue it. So Michelle, I'd love to turn it over to you to have you share a little bit about what you saw as you helped us assess the NielsenIQ sales environment and what some of our biggest opportunities are.
Sure. Thanks, Nicole. And Bob, if you could please go ahead and display my slides, that would be wonderful. So you can imagine coming in as a partner with Nicole and her team at NielsenIQ, being a market research company and dealing with data. It was a little daunting, but they had some very specific questions. And we were in a wonderful position to be able to use data to help them answer those burning questions. So they really want to know, as Nicole indicated, what are our sellers facing? And how does it differ, by different roles and different business units? How do we tease that out? And then how do we know which selling motions matter? So we actually used a very robust process, diagnostic process that we call the Agile Edge. And that process allows us to use deal level data to analyze a few very important things, but I'll talk about those in just a moment. But the process that we go through for this diagnostic is we conduct some interviews, with high-performing managers and sellers within NielsenIQ to learn if there's any peculiarities to their selling environment, to their clients, in order to be able to then structure the data collection in a way that's highly relevant. So we tailor instruments to be able to gather the deal level data. We gather that data. We use a proprietary algorithm in order to analyze that data, and we produce a series of insights. And those insights, I guess, when I was in a conversation with Nicole a few weeks ago, and she said, this was the money information here. When you shared with us the kind of information you were able to share, it was a little shocking. The level of insight and information that we gained allowed us to be much more precise in our enablement efforts. So what types of insights were we able to gain for NielsenIQ? Let's take a look at those. So Bob, I'm not able to move my slides for some reason. Maybe you could help advance those.
Be sure to click on in the body of the slide itself, not in our presentation window.
Yeah, I think I might be in Nicole's presentation. I don't know.
It's definitely yours, but I can put up mine and then I'll just move slides for you. How about that?
That's perfect. Okay.
Because I'm good at that.
For some reason, it's just just not happening.
There we go.
So if you could just move it to the next slide, that would be wonderful.
You bet.
So the types of insights that we were able to actually provide for NielsenIQ, the first one, Bob, was which buying factors were most significantly impacting the way that sellers adapted and sold within NielsenIQ. So we actually examined over 17 buying factors within these 5 categories to determine, of all the things that could be influencing the buying situation sellers face, which ones are the most powerful predictors of how their buyers buy. So we first identify those 5 to 7 buying factors, many of which are very unique to NielsenIQ. We use that information to then analyze those buying factors to determine what are the unique buying situations that those factors organize into that their sellers face. So Bob, if you could just continue to forward those slides. So each organization that we work with has on average between 4 and 6 unique buying situations. And we're able to analyze those buying factors to identify those buying situations. And then to Nicole's point, what are the selling motions that actually matter and win in those buying situations? So what are the factors that determine how our buyers buy? How do they organize into unique buying situations? Which strategy of selling is most likely to lead to a win? And finally, how capable are our sellers to execute the tactics within each of those strategies? So those are really key questions that NielsenIQ had. And we use this diagnostic process to be able to answer them in very specific and relevant ways for their organization. But before we talk about the findings, I have a quick poll that I'd like for you to take. So Bob, if you could put that poll up. The poll really asks, when was the last time you analyzed your sales approach? Was it A, within the last year, B, within the past 2 years? Was it more than 2 years ago? Or have you never really conducted a formal analysis? We'd love to hear your responses to that.
And we'll give the audience just a couple minutes to vote. Again, the vote is the poll is in a small window just below the video display. And if you vote, we'll give you just a moment to do that before we put up the
perfect
results. Yeah.
Perfect.
So here they come.
So, oh, here we come. Okay, so wow, interesting. So most of you have done a formal analysis within the last 2 years. That's actually pretty exciting and encouraging. And I think what was interesting for Nicole and her team at Nielsen was that there's a difference between doing sort of a competency assessment around specific skills and doing a broader assessment of the buying and selling environment in a way that was actually highly actionable and precise. So when we actually did this analysis, the insights that we found were a little bit staggering. So Bob, why don't we go ahead and put the next slide up, what we learned at NielsenIQ.
Will do. I'll make a comment, if I may, about this, which is, the past 2 years have been perhaps the most change intensive of any for large sales organizations in recent history, so it's not surprising that so many would indicate that they're examining, wholesale level, what's going on with their sales organization. But I'll point out that even without the chaos of the past 2 years, some research that we did about 3 years ago indicates that large sales organizations routinely go through these very transformative change initiatives. We, in fact, believe that they do that on average every 3 years, large sales organizations, and that's in sort of normal operating time.
So Bob, to that point, and Nicole also mentioned that they engaged with us, NielsenIQ engaged with us for a 3-year engagement initially, and that's a pretty big commitment. And what that indicates is that they're aware that this is iterative and change happens over time. It's not, it's not like we get the training dip and our people come out, enlightened and all of a sudden, they're doing everything we need for them to do. It happens over time, just like any level of expertise is obtained over time. So one of the first things we learned was that there were 5 specific factors that were most significantly impacting how buyers buy and then how sellers behave at NielsenIQ. I'm obviously not going to share the specifics because they're proprietary, but 2 of those 5 factors were completely unique to Nielsen. So if we hadn't done those interviews to determine what was unique about them, we wouldn't have been able to identify that level of specificity. We also identified that there were 4 unique buying situations faced by Nielsen sellers. Not 6, not 8, but 4. And they were very different and unique. They all had those 5 factors that were relevant, but they showed up in different levels. We also found that of the 4 strategies that were identified in the sales methodology research as being displayed by high performers, all 4 of those strategies were in evidence within NielsenIQ. Even though they had put all their eggs in the consultative basket, there were individuals within the organization that were displaying these different strategies and using them to win. The other thing we learned was that when we took a look at seller capability, clearly they were strongest at the consultative selling tactics, but all 4 were at play, and we found pretty significant skill gaps with 3 of the 4 strategies within the tactics that were needed to execute those effectively. So when that came back to Nicole's hypothesis that, we've been putting all our eggs in the consultative basket, we feel like we need to move beyond this. Where's the evidence? This actually provided some pretty strong evidence that moving beyond that sort of consultative bucket was not only important, but necessary in order to give their sellers the skills they needed to navigate these different buying situations that were identified. So what were the pillars that we used in order to determine how to best help NielsenIQ make the transformation they identified as being their desired state? So Bob, if you'll advance the slide, the first one of those pillars was our Agile Edge diagnostic process. And I just talked you through a little bit of that. And that gave us insight not only into the buying situations, selling motions, and seller capability, but it also gave us insight into sales management and coaching practices that differentiated between their high-performing and poor-performing managers. We don't really have time to go over that now, but that was one of the pillars, if you'll advance the slide, was the sales management insights and the sales management code. So we got very specific insights about sales management practices that we were then able to codify and deploy along with their sales management training, aligned with the sales management code. And then the insights that we were able to determine regarding the buying situations and selling motions, we've been able to incorporate and deploy along with the sales agility code. So those 3 pillars are coming together over this 3-year period in a way that allows us to not only help them address the role-specific training needs, but equip their sellers and managers in a way that's iterative over time, builds on the learning, and then builds that expertise through deliberate practice. So if you put the next slide up, Bob, we can actually show you a little bit about this 3-year journey. You can see on the left-hand side, we've got these 3 pillars of the Agile Edge, the Sales Management Code, and the Sales Agility Code. We're actually moving into year 2 of our engagement now. And just to give you a sense for the scope of this engagement, and this is just a rough number. Nicole, don't cringe because I know this number's changing. But the last update that I got was there's roughly 1,800 sellers and about 800 managers that are going to be going through this transformation effort. Clearly, it's going to take some time to get all of these individuals trained, and it's going to be deployed in stages over this 3-year period with different levels of reinforcement and changing up based on what we learn over time. We're going to be re-diagnosing the organization every 12 months so that we can stay ahead of changes in management and coaching practices, as well as changes in buying situations and seller motions. One of the things I'd really like to highlight here, which was, I just learned this very recently about the NielsenIQ deployment, is that Nicole and her team have done this in a very interesting, very deliberate way. Organizations will often deploy in one region, and then, once they're sort of midway through that region, they'll move to another region and then deploy that way over time. Nicole and her team made a very deliberate decision to deploy across all regions basically at once. And they had to then identify who are our priority populations within each of those regions. And I was really amazed at just the savvy that her team used to make this decision. But she identified high-performing teams in each of those regions and prioritized the initial stages of the engagement to be deployed with those high-performing teams. And so we're deploying in every region at the same time, but starting with our high-performing teams. And what we know based on prior experience is that the high performers tend to be the ones that are the most likely to adopt very effective frameworks. And they tend to become sort of a beachhead within the organization that creates a pull-through effect. And Nicole and I had not had this conversation ahead of this webcast. And I was talking with my internal client services team, and they were telling me how these were being prioritized. And I brought that up with Nicole in our preparation for this session earlier today. And I said, that's so interesting to me that you identified that as your path for this engagement when we didn't really talk much about that, but it turned out that that was the way that was going to work the best for you. And that was the way that we've seen work best with some of our clients in the past. So Nicole, if you want to talk a little bit about that, I think that would be really interesting.
Yeah, I have a huge smile on my face because all that's coming to my mind is that we were just taking everything that Harald taught us and leveraging our high impact activities to pick the high impact associates that would make the biggest difference in the organization. But in all seriousness, we knew we had a lot of change to undertake, and we suspected that a global rollout amongst the population that you could argue would be most influential at creating and generating this change would be our most effective way to get this done at scale. And we've seen just an incredible response. We're still in the earlier stages of rolling out the Sales Agility Code, but from the Sales Manager Code globally, there's just such an engagement on our internal communities around high impact activities, sales management, coaching, et cetera. It's really, really been fantastic to see.
Yeah, and I think another interesting point about that, Nicole, is not only did you choose high performers to be the first ones in each of the regions, you made the decision to put them through the training as impact teams, as fully impact teams. So intact teams. And so the sales leaders and the frontline sales managers are going through that training together. And we know that second line leaders are a really important leverage point in determining the level of adoption of frontline managers in some of these really important practices. So the fact that you're putting them together in intact teams eliminates a barrier that we often have to combat when it comes to these sorts of engagements. So, kudos to you and your team for making those really smart decisions.
I will give all the kudos to the team on that. Thank you very much.
So I would like to call a moderator's timeout and just ask some clarification about this, because you're making it sound super easy. You're saying that, you started with the high performers because that's where you'd have the best impact, but you're neglecting to say that they're also some of the most difficult people to win over. Can you just explain? And then, this business about so much enthusiasm for the changes and the enthusiasm for embracing these new ideas, it sounds highly suspicious to many who have tried to do this in their own organizations. There must be something else happening. Can you just help us understand what led high performers to welcome these changes so much? I mean, just your thoughts about that would be interesting.
Yeah, I mean, you're right, Bob. It's the sales organization, in fact, is one of the hardest organizations to change, right? Because many sellers are really set in their ways. I would think about this in a couple ways for what makes this unique to NielsenIQ. One is a lot of our sellers have a very long tenure with Nielsen, and they've played a lot of different roles in the organization. So many of them may have been in more customer success roles, and they're navigating into a sales role, and they're understanding their targets, and they're questioning how they're going to hit their target when they've got all these other activities that exist on their plates, right? So when I talk about how the organization embraced this process, let me first point back to the fact that I talked about laying the foundation of communication very early. We've been talking about sales transformation for a year, a full 6 months ahead of rolling out any of the training. So that's the first thing. We've really laid this groundwork and got people excited about it. The second thing that I think is unique, though, to our organization is the amount of ambiguity in roles for people over the last several years has created a real hunger for role clarity. And this process, this transformation, and the educational investments that we've been making in our talent have helped remove some of that ambiguity for our teams. So it's not just like a stroll through the daisies every day of the week. There are a lot of hard conversations we're having around whether or not the processes that we're defining will actually create the change that we need to create. But where we benefit is coming from the starting point of people being so ready for role clarity, to be more effective as sellers, to be more focused on being able to achieve their targets, etc.
Yeah, some great insights. I mean, it sounds to me like, unlike so many of these initiatives, you're not just implementing change, you're implementing it, and it's accompanied by this greater clarity. Mm-hmm. Another way of saying that is you're telling people not just what to do differently, but what to stop doing, and you're making it more focused. And then the other thing is you're investing in support. So it's clear that it's not just about doing more or doing something different. It's doing very specific things and getting more support in doing that. Is that a fair assessment, Michelle?
That is. Oh, sorry. Yeah, from my perspective, that is, but I'll leave it to you.
Well, the only thing that I'll add to that, Bob, and this is why I think anybody who engages with a sales training company is a little bit leery, because they can pave the way as well as they want, but then we get in front of their people, right? And what we do when we're in front of their people matters a lot. And they can have all the pieces, all the parts paved, and if we don't get in there and do something really meaningful with them, we torpedo the good work that Nicole and her team have done.
Yeah,
so
and you're setting yourself up for being organically rejected,
right?
Like a bad kidney.
Right. So what we do differently, and I think this is again one of the reasons that Nicole trusted us to work with her on this, is because she knows that research is really important to us. We don't actually develop methodologies and then go research to see that they work. We do research on what high performers do, and then we develop methodologies to replicate that. So that's why when it comes to this really important piece of, adoption and lowering resistance, we tend to get less resistance because, number one, we use our clients' data. It's kind of hard to argue with your own data, but we also research high performers then to develop ways to replicate that performance versus the other way around. So we tend to have a little bit less resistance. Nicole, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think all of the pre-work, whether it was done internally to set the stage for the change or whether it was done in partnership with VantagePoint to really define how we would take that process or that material out to the broader audience was critical to success of this program.
Yeah.
If I may, just want to call out something else that you did that you are sort of almost taking for granted, but many organizations overlook this very fundamental approach, which is you sort of started from the ground up. You went and learned about the sales job. I just want to show this slide again, if I may. And you defined these very specific things about the selling context and environment. And you then used that to determine, how to address the change, as opposed to going in the opposite direction, which so many companies do. So I'm guessing it's also helped you gain acceptance among people doing these roles, because you've been codifying things that they've found successful and to be true in their job.
Yeah, I would say two things. I would say on both ends of the spectrum, it helped us get support for the initiative, because from our sellers, they said, like, yeah, okay, you're hearing us. These are the situations we're in. You're taking the data that we've brought to you, and you're helping us with strategies to go tackle these specific situations. So it was empowering for the sellers themselves to hear more about a different approach. For the leadership, there's no argument when you put a red, yellow, green chart in front of someone and you say, we need to continue to invest in sales training or in sales enablement or in XYZ, right? We've got that data, that quantitative way to show leaders as well that we've got to continue this transformation.
Good stuff. I know we have just one or two more slides.
Yeah, I just wanted to really wrap up with the audience and share that we've learned a lot over the past 6 months. And, I'll be the first to admit, we've got a whole lot more to learn. We're really just launching this transformation. And I hope that maybe a year from now, I get the opportunity to come back and talk to you and report on our progress. I think everyone would agree that this transformation is a process in and of itself. And it's been really exciting for me to share just a quick glimpse into the early stages of our transformation with each of you guys today. We'll stay on this path, and it's really for two key reasons. Both are big, big benefits to our organization and fundamental measures of our success over time. And the first is our people. We're going to drive more engagement. I talked a bit about that. We're going to be setting goals people can achieve, and we're going to be giving them the tools to achieve those goals. So this will help create a better role fit, and that's rewarding for all of us over time as we look at our jobs and the satisfaction we get in our jobs day to day. And the other is that idea of growth, right? Operating a leaner and more efficient or more productive organization is going to help us generate more revenue per FTE and find some of that growth that's been a bit more elusive as the industry has changed over the past several years. So thank you for listening and kind of humoring our transformation journey. And thanks to Michelle for your continued partnership and bringing this to life for the organization. Bob, are we receiving any questions from the audience that we might want to?
We do have a few. I'll pick maybe one, maybe two, and we can try to squeeze them in. If you do have a question, you're welcome to continue to submit them on chat or through email using the instructions that you see scrolling on the screen right now. And if we can't get to those, we'll respond offline. So the questioner actually asked about something you brought up just at the moment, at the end there, which is your plans to keep the effort sustained over time. The questioner asks, how do you keep abreast of changes in the things that you indicate are so important, like customer dynamics or changes in buying behavior? Who's responsible for that, and how do you make sure it's up to date?
Yeah, man, that's a good question. I will humbly say I don't have the perfect answer to that. I think it's one of the things that we realized was a big gap for us as we thought about or really defined like how we needed to transform. I'm a big, big believer in recognizing what you can't do yourself. And I know that's easier said than done because it requires funding and organizational support to be able to do a lot of the research or the training initiatives that we've talked about with Michelle. But those really have been foundational to helping us understand just how much the industry has changed. The more simplistic answer to that question that I'll say as I reflect on how I want to answer is listen to your teams and your associates as well. Part of the reason that it's been so easy for us to adopt some of this transformation is the excitement that comes from our teams. And that excitement is there because they've been carrying this burden for a long time. And so transforming is helping address that burden that many of our associates have been raising over time. And so in listening to them, we're also getting a better understanding of how the marketplace has changed and what we need to do to adapt.
Yeah, it seems like an important thing, but not the thing most closest at hand, but one that you'll consider as you continue to make progress. Michelle, maybe same question you could address based on your perspective with other.
Yeah. So
keep your finger on the pulse.
Sure. One of the things our clients rely on us for is providing a mechanism for them to collect deal level data to see how those dynamics have changed. So it's very difficult to stay ahead of buying behavior, right? It's not as easy as it is if you're in B2C. B2C is super easy because you get a lot of data. It's not very rich, but you get a lot of it. When it comes to B2B sales, it's just the opposite. You don't get much data, but the data you get is very rich, right? So you have to have a mechanism to be able to take the gold that can be mined from the sellers and then mine that gold in a way that allows you to see subtle changes in buyer behavior and subtle changes in selling motions over time. And that's why these multi-year engagements are useful, because we can reassess at predetermined intervals to see what has been changing regarding the factors that matter. Are there new buying situations emerging? Are the selling motions different? And if so, how are they different? It takes some of the pressure off folks like Nicole and her team and puts the onus back on us as partners to give them a mechanism for figuring that out.
Good. Well, thank you. Well, sadly, we're out of time. I just want to personally thank you both for sharing this insight with us, because you've given us a great look an in vivo look at what's happening in this organization, as opposed to so many times we've looked and it's after everything's been done. So you are really working through some changes in a very effective way, and you communicate it very compellingly. And I hope you can come back and give us an update as you continue to make progress.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So again, thanks to our guest today, Nicole Collida Davis from NielsenIQ, and our friend Michelle Vazzana from VantagePoint Performance for being with us. Before we sign off, I'll remind our audience that our next Sales Management Association presentation is tomorrow. That's Wednesday, July 21st. We'll host a session then on revenue operations. It's called Realizing Value from RevOps. You can learn about this session and many other sessions on our website, salesmanagement.org. I'm Bob Kelly, Sales Management Association Chairman. On behalf of Nicole Collida Davis from NielsenIQ and Michelle Vazzana from VantagePoint Performance, thank you for being with us today. Goodbye until next time.